Hey everybody, today I'm going to be showing you how to make a really simple modern looking MagSafe phone stand that you can use with your phone. So some of the supplies and tools we're going to need. So this is a really simple project. You're not going to need too many fancy tools, but we're going to start off with some red oak. This is 1/2 inch thick by 3 inches wide. I buy it in 4-foot blanks, but you are only going to need about 8 inches. So some of the tools, a router with a flush trim bit, going to be super handy. You could probably use a hole saw if that's all you had. You're also going to need a miter saw or some other type of saw you can use to cut an angle, and we'll talk about that here in a minute. For the joint, there's only one joint in the entire project. I'm going to be using pocket hole screws and a pocket hole jig, but if you don't have that, wood glue would work just fine. It's not needed to be super strong. You're also going to be using some aerosol lacquer and some spray adhesive. We'll talk about that more towards the end of the video. Also going to be using some double-sided tape. You're going to need a round file of some kind. The size isn't too important. We're going to be using this to cut the recess for the charging cord. A clamp is going to be super useful, and a square is always good to keep nearby. So the stand is going to be 5 1/4 inches tall, and the base is going to measure at 2 3/4 inches. These dimensions aren't super important. You can kind of make it however you'd like, but I have found that these dimensions work with most iPhone models pretty well without too much interference. So here I am measuring out my lines real quick. Like I said, it's not super specific, and then I'm going to go ahead and make a cut. So my first cut's going to be 90 degrees just to get that total length of 8 inches. So one thing I have noticed about this saw, this one is made by Jorgensen, is it's not very accurate. I have it set to an indicated 75 degrees, and I'll measure up 2.5 inches on that board and go ahead and cut that angle. But just eyeball whatever you think looks nice. So here I am. I'm going to do an initial mock-up just to make sure my pieces fit. So like I just said a minute ago, that saw that I have doesn't necessarily make too accurate of a cut, so I'm just cleaning up those miters on a belt sander real quick to make sure this board is square. And again, we're going to test fit everything. Make sure we have a flush fit here. So the diameter of the MagSafe charging puck is going to be 55.5 millimeters. The depth is 4.37, and that is per Apple's manufacturing details. So the trickiest part of this project was figuring out how to make a perfectly round recess in the top of the stand. So I ended up making this jig. This is a little bit overkill. The reason I ended up making this jig was because I make several of these at a time. But you could easily get away with just tracing the charger and then using a router to carefully cut it out. The reason I use this device, this jig, is because I can make them quickly, and I can make several that all come out exactly the same. So here I am, I'm just setting the depth of my router, and then I'll make the first cut. And you can see that ends up providing a perfectly round recess there in the top that charger can fit in snugly. So this is the other part of the jig that I use for making these. What I'll do is I'll insert the top piece of the stand face down, and then this allows me to cut a channel in the back of the stand. So you could easily use a table saw for this. You could also use like a Dremel or a rotary tool to cut this out. You don't necessarily need a jig. If you have a router table, you could easily do this as well. So you'll see here what I'm pointing at. This is going to be the recess portion for the cord to actually protrude from. What you don't want to have happen is a lot of pressure to be on that charging cord. So here I am using the rounded file to go ahead and carve that channel in there for the cord to sit in. You can see I'm going to go ahead and do a test fit here with the actual charger. what I'm looking for. I don't want it to bind up anywhere. It should fit in there somewhat snugly, but it shouldn't be hard to remove. So now I'm just going to take some really fine sandpaper. I believe this was 240 grit, and just go over the entire project. It's a lot harder to sand everything down once it's assembled, so take your time on this part to make sure you don't have any splinters or anything sticking out. So here I am drilling the pocket holes for the pocket hole screws. Like I said earlier, this isn't necessary. This is just what I elected to do. Wood glue would work perfectly fine for this use. It's not required to be a super strong joint. I just think the pocket holes look nice. If you end up making this and you decide to use the pocket holes, just refer to the manufacturer's instructions on how to use the pocket hole jig. They're not difficult. The one I use in this video is made by Craig, and they're about 15 bucks for the kit. So from here I just go right back to the belt sander, and you could easily do this by hand with a sanding block. What I like to do is run the base over the belt sander just to make sure it's perfectly flat, and then I'll go back with a little sanding block and just clean up all the edges. Hit it with a little compressed air to get all the dust off, and from here we're going to go ahead and get ready to finish this whole project. So for the finish here, I'm going to be using this spray lacquer. This is a semi-gloss. I picked it up off the shelf at my local hardware store. The piece up in the air, and I'll go for 2 coats. So one thing that I've noticed with the spray lacquer is it can tend to leave a little bit of a rough finish. A trick I picked up was to take some brown paper and crumple it up real good, and then just go over the whole thing with that. It ends up leaving a really, really smooth and clean finish. So the last thing I do before I finish these up is I take a piece of felt and I'll cut it out here with a rotary cutter, and I'll use that spray adhesive that I showed y'all earlier in the video, and put a light coat of that spray glue on that felt, and then carefully press the stand on top of that. And then I'll let that dry for a few minutes. It dries pretty quick, but it just leaves a nice base for the stand to sit on. So the last thing before we wrap it up, we're going to take a little piece of this double-sided tape, and we're going to put it right here where the charger sits, and that'll just make sure that that charger doesn't fall out whenever the phone is being attached or removed. And that's about it. So we'll go ahead and pull this tape off before we put the charger in, and then we'll carefully feed this charging cord through the hole from the front. And we'll carefully line up that charging puck. Pay attention to where that cord comes out to make sure it goes into that groove that we cut in there to make sure it doesn't bind up. You'll notice that this will support the phone in either portrait mode, or if you prefer to use your phone in standby mode, you can also turn the phone horizontally and it'll hold it up there just fine. So that's about it for this project. I appreciate y'all staying tuned towards the end of the video. If you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment. I try to read most of them, if not all of them, and I'll answer as I can. So that's about it for this project. If you enjoyed, please leave a thumbs up and subscribe if you feel like it. All right, y'all take it easy. Bye.